Hi, this is Jim Townsend at InfoStrat. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today on top 10 best practices to migrate data from on-premise to the cloud. And we're fortunate enough to have with us Libby Bishop and Pierre Holsebus from Scribe. They're the company that's the leading vendor of data integration and data migration products, not just for dynamic CRM, which is our primary focus, but for a large number of ERP, CRM, and other products. They've been in this business for a long time. Today we're going to focus on something very topical and take a look at options for cloud migration and using the cloud-based version of Scribe. So at that, I'm going to turn it over to Libby to kick things off.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jim, for hosting us today. And Pierre, if you'll go to the oh, perfect. You're right ahead of me. So Jim gave actually a pretty good background about Scribe, so I'll save the commercial message. But I will point out a few things. As Jim had mentioned, we've been doing this a long time, and 20 years is a long time to be focusing on data integration. And with probably the scenario that you're in is that you have on-premise systems. So Scribe started with on-premise integration, and today with the movement to the cloud, it's how do we get you to the cloud? What do you need to consider when you're doing that other than just I need to migrate my data? So what we'll focus on are some of the best practices, some of the things you may or may not have thought about, and then at the end, Pierre is going to give a demonstration of a tool that Scribe has that can actually migrate you if you're currently today on Dynamic CRM on-premise and move you to the cloud with Dynamic CRM Online. Scribe offers several solutions if you're running in the cloud, if you're running on-premise, or you may have a combination of both where you're in the cloud with CRM and on-premise with things like ERP. So we can cover you in just about any environment that your applications run in. We also provide a comprehensive portfolio of application connectors, database connectors. We have ODBC drivers, web services. So basically, we can connect your dynamic CRM or other CRM application to virtually any endpoint. One of our best assets actually is our channel of certified partners. So for example, InfoStrat is a certified partner, and the way we work with our partners is they're certified on Scribe products, so they will work with you to define your integration requirements and then help you with your Scribe integration. And then as you see on the right, our customer base is global, about 14,000 customers ranging across all different industries, from banking, retail, public sector, manufacturing, and distribution. So with that, that's the end of the commercial message, and I'm going to turn it over to Pierre to take you through the session.
Thanks, Libby. Thank you. I hope everybody's having a great day. As Libby was saying, we want to talk about CRM and the concepts around integration and migration, and specifically leveraging some of the discussions around the cloud, the implications of being cloud-based integrations and migrations. So, you know, we work with many customers, as Libby was saying, globally, and we've gained a lot of experience with those companies. And so we're going to share with you some of the things that we've found to be some of the best practices and hopefully some takeaways that you can use in your project going forward. So a couple of things at the very beginning, you know, just kind of to set the stage about integration and CRM as an application. We have found over the years that in many ways CRM projects are all about integration, whether that's integrating business systems and data or just different departments and business processes. CRM kind of has become a catch-all for many new projects and organizations, whether that's customer care or sales and marketing or totally unique projects that are just built on the CRM platform, and those are commonly referred to as XRM solutions, and InfoStrat certainly is a partner that builds many of those types of solutions also. So some of the things we really approach this knowing that most of these projects are integration projects. A lot of the risk for large projects comes from that integration effort on the back end of facilitating data, getting it put in the right place at the right time so people can make the right action. At the very top, though, CRM often is used to, as we will say, bring chaos to the order. So to speak, that would be the opposite way, actually, to bring order to the chaos, to kind of help take the divisions that exist in organizations in their data, those data silos, and break that down and present that all to somebody in one place. That's the strategy often that's being used. So CRM is the platform, but as the tech and the Scribe is part of that leverage to use this technology lever. So integration really becomes a fundamental discipline that's required. When in one of my favorite consultants and business analysts in the IT space is Ray Wang, and he wrote a seminal piece about what the new CIO is all about and what that really means in the business space and in the public sector space. And a CIO isn't just somebody who keeps the lights on and makes sure that the computers are backed up. We're really, somebody has to, that we're looking for people that are looking forward to use the technology as a strategic lever in the organization to be externally focused around what it means to be in the customer care business, or really using the software and the technology and the people and the processes as that lever. And so I doesn't just stand for information, it often stands for integration, and that's a key core discipline today that we have to develop. So these are some of the key principles we really feel. First and foremost, and one of our very best practices is we say that experience matters, whether that's the individual consultant doing the work or that's the organization and the people forming the solution and architecting the thing. InfoStrat's a great example of an organization that's done a very good job at building experience of doing this over and over again, because integration is very complicated, actually. If you think about when we bring an integration project into place, it's not just addressing moving fields of data. We're often have to address the business issues and the organizational issues, and so CRM really becomes a change process that the organization has to go through, and that is why experience matters. And you'll see later on there's technical issues too that really are, there's a science to what we do, but there's also an art to what we do. It often deals with approaches and processes that have seemingly small implications early on in the design phase, but ultimately have a very long-term effect in terms of the cost of managing this stuff going forward. We really do feel that hybrid, and when we talk about hybrid, we feel hybrid is a reality, and by that what we're meaning is you have both on-premise systems that probably will never move. They will always be there. Organizations that buy mainframes and have bought them will most likely keep some of those mainframe systems around, but they want to move forward in terms of new services and new application offerings for their users, and that's why they're using online platforms like Dynamics CRM Online. So we're going to take advantage of the latest and greatest and have the coolest application framework and the most portable and highly secure cloud-based infrastructure, but at the same time we still need to have high security around the data being kept in the back room. So Scribe is a big part of that process, and hybrid really is something that we have to think about. There's a huge impact that an organization has when this isn't considered. There's a lot of sad stories about very large agencies and commercial organizations that purchased CRM, installed it on-premise, and built their integration engine from scratch, only to find out that the business users decided they want to move online. During that process, all of the integrations had to be rewritten. And so that upgrade process was not easy. The upgrade process is expensive then, and we're adding features to, we're not adding any features, we're just moving the process online when folks do that. So we have to keep that hybrid is a reality today for a lot of the commercial and public space, but it's also a reality tomorrow for a lot of organizations that are currently just on premise. You have to design the solutions with that in mind. We really want to, another principle is to use as much out of the box and more configuration and less custom coding because of this, because the application platforms are moving at a very rapid pace, the less custom code that I have to put up there, the less I have to deal with when it comes to change. And so we're looking for these are some of those kind of standard key principles. And so we're buying into application platforms that are fungible, that are extensible, that have an extensive ecosystem and a marketplace to have a lot of different types of connections, not only for today, but out down the road a couple of years too. So agility actually ends up being one of the key issues around deploying a CRM solution, and why so many organizations are moving away from having a premise-based solution to an online solution, because they feel that they're getting more agility up there. That is because the platform is advancing, and it advances at a very rapid pace. And because it's up there in the cloud advancing at a rapid pace, the business and the organization is able to take advantage of those investments that the Microsoft is making in the platform very quickly and incorporate those changes into the application without having to go back to the IT organization and say, hey, I need to do an upgrade. Can you apply the service pack, because that new feature is only in that service pack? So that the internal friction and the cost of all of that trying to keep up with the stuff is very expensive. And so by being in the cloud, we reduce that expense. That's one of the big benefits of keeping this more agile for our users. And so many organizations do have custom, the ability to write. We've got developers on staff. Microsoft has an SDK, so let's go for it. Why do we need a tool? Let's just develop this. One of the things that we have found from Gartner recently is that they have done some studies and advised their customers away from this strategy, because the costs of maintaining that in the long run are very expensive. In fact, the majority of those costs for custom coded integration comes from after the fact, after something has been deployed. You have all those additional costs. So what a lot of organizations do is they think, I'm going to have CRM, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud. So I'm going to have my CRM solution, and I've got some other application that I'm going to integrate with. Let's just use it our billing system or our grant management system. And we'll just hire somebody, we'll write an RFP, and we'll send that out, and we'll get this custom piece to work for us, and then we'll be ready to go. We're done, right? What often happens is, because we're so focused on just this one piece, those RFPs and that approach doesn't take into account all the other universe of integrations that would have to be done later on. And so that kind of RFP management approach of the way of doing things end up with a system like this, where we've got custom code and third-party ISVs and more custom code and compiled .NET pieces. And so for organizations that are good Microsoft customers, they're buying maintenance, they're paying for the next version, but they can't never get to the next version because of the cost of managing all of this custom code. And this internal friction is what adds to the cost of managing it. So Scribe is really a really important part of really trying to consider this part of the process about the cost of maintaining this is really an issue. So when we talk about migration today, that was what drew you to this conversation through the website and some of the discussions that we have. So I'm going to talk about some of those really great practices in a second here. But you'll hear me as we discuss this use both migration and integration almost interchangeably. And that's because the business in many ways is changing, because many of our customers are doing what we call a staged migration. And I'll use some of our current customers and former customers that have migrated using Scribe. So if you come from a small business or a small public sector team and you're running CRM on-premise, or you have an on-premise system and you've got, let's say, 20 users, and you're looking to migrate to CRM Online, that may be a one-week process. We're going to work on the integration, we're going to test it, and then on Friday we're going to turn off the old system, we're going to migrate all the data over, and Monday we're going to train all the new users, and they're ready to go. And that works for some organizations where the migration is a one-time deal. Most enterprise class organizations and public sector organizations, they don't have that kind of luxury. Their migration may take years. They may be coming off a mainframe system where the screens are very controlled, and there's user issues around just turning that off one day and turning on a new system. And it's kind of very expensive too to do a huge discovery project that takes, let's say, 6-9 months to a year, then do the migration, and then while that whole process takes place, that 6-9 months, the requirements sometimes will change. And so an approach that's often taken is a project like this, a migration project that has development and designing parts of the integration, and then the initial kind of phase of migration happening. And then overlapping that initial migration of the data, which may actually take a few days to a week to move all the data over there and to make sure it's good to go, we start testing, and we start our user acceptance testing. And in the middle, we are going to start our training once that data is accepted. Now, in the background, what's going to happen is Scribe, instead of just migration being a one-time thing, we're going to set up processes to do updates from our initial system into CRM. And so we're integrating now data from our legacy application that we're ultimately going to get off of into CRM. So we're pushing updates into CRM all the time. So the CRM system now is constantly being fed data from the source application that we're migrating off of. And at some point in time, then the organization can, department by department, move off and have a go-live date, whether that's a single go-live date, or a lot of organizations, that go-live date is going to be go-live for one department, then go-live for another department 3 months later, and go-live for another department. All along the way, changes are being made based on the user's feedback and input, thus lowering the risk of a whole project, of thinking that we can do a year's worth of discovery to find out all the business processes, design a system, and then turn it over to the users. The users haven't even had a chance to see how the new system works yet, and actually get in there and give feedback to the process. So this agile project is really the approach that's very modern, and it addresses a lot of the issues around, building this kind of boiling the ocean type of model. So this is lowering the risk. It's getting the users in the system early and allowing them to do this. And for some of our organizations, one of the projects that we have as a reference project for us was the Illinois Department of Corrections. And the Illinois Department of Corrections runs Dynamics CRM Online, if you can believe it. And they migrated from an old legacy environment, and that took several years to happen. And so they're slowly but surely were able to peel off at a department by department level and build those new entities inside of the CRM system and adjust it as they went along. All along the way, Scribe is in the background updating those records in CRM, and ultimately they were done with the project. And so then now they're, now they're a reference account for us, and they use us for other pieces of the puzzle. So this is that kind of concept that migration isn't just a weekend deal where we turn off the old system and turn off the new. This practice is really one of the very best practices, that we are staging this migration and synchronizing changes from the source in a short period of time. Now, I wanted to give you a couple little fun facts about Microsoft, because Microsoft actually internally used Scribe for their migration off of Dynamics CRM on-premise 2011 to CRM Online. So they're their own customer. And so Scribe was part of that process for them to do this. And they were really able to get this done in a very similar way to what we just said, where they had country by country gone and staged that migration over time. And so it just took them a few weeks to actually get all the mappings ready to do this. We have some templates, and they obviously have very smart people too, so they were able to get a bunch of folks up to speed very quickly on the tool and get in there, and from the time that they were acquiring it to the time that they were doing their first migrations of the first countries was about 90 days. So they were able to move this massive amounts of data. Microsoft internally in their sales organization has over 30,000 CRM users. They have a sales funnel, if you can think of opportunity management systems, of $40 billion with 100,000 customers in 100 countries, over 100 countries. So the concept was, hey, we're going to, get rid of this, like we were saying earlier, a lot of the friction that happens by custom code, and use a tool to move this thing faster through the system. So it saved them a lot of money, and they were able to reduce a lot of their expenses by doing this move and using Scribe. So it was pretty cool. This is the list of the countries. This is from a white paper Microsoft did in their case study for this move, and how long it took them. As you can see, they went country by country to get this done. And then they were able to, again, learn as they went, and so they could improve performance and get some speed in there. So these are just some interesting slides. If you can imagine a CRM environment that involves a very complicated process around data deduplication and a whole data management team that keeps track of data changes and things on this order. So they were able to, again, use Scribe to help pull their data out and put it into CRM Online. So, I'm going to skip through. I'm sorry. All right. So, how people are using Scribe for migration is a couple different ways when we talk about migration, where people are using us. And these are some of those scenarios where somebody's going and skipping versions. They have CRM 4.0 or 2011, and they want to just skip over that whole process of doing incremental upgrades in order to get the data over, ultimately so they can use simpler mapping tools to move the data over, or just upgrade the server. So there's not a clear path. If you haven't gone through the process in the past of going from 4.0 to 4.1 to 3 to 3.11 if you hadn't done that process, now all of a sudden there's not a path any longer to just take a CRM 4.0 system and upgrade that system because of all of the changes that have happened on the database and the versions. So there's not a clean path between those two. So Scribe is used for a lot of that, for people skipping complete versions, or just literally rehosting the application, like in a 2011 to maybe 2015 on-prem or 2013 on-prem. Those applications, if you get into the technical aspects, require rehosting in a 64-bit infrastructure, and 2011 was a 32-bit infrastructure. So a lot of organizations take the upgrade really as a chance to redeploy the whole system. Sometimes folks want to take and migrate data out of CRM so they can have a training instance of CRM, so they can take their online data, and bring it in and set up a current version of this is what is in CRM as of yesterday. So when they do their training, they're working on data that that they're familiar with. We also have organizations that are using system consolidation of taking multiple CRM systems and putting them into one system, or organizations now that are looking at the beautiful diversity that happens inside of the Microsoft cloud, and to be able to say, oh, all of my customer care people that work in Europe, I want their CRM system to be in Europe. So I can, instead of me having to manage high bandwidth across, transoceanic kind of bandwidth, I can put my data in all these different data centers closer to my users, whether that's in Asia, in Australia, or over in Europe.
Pierre, I've got a question for you. The question is, you mentioned that during the migration for Microsoft, one of their goals was to reduce the amount of custom code. Can you elaborate on that? How did they get rid of custom code? What role did Scribe play in doing that?
So a lot of the custom code that they had was for integration. So I guess I have been in certain businesses, and when your customers have a certain competency, they tend to emphasize that skill set. And so I guess a team of Microsoft engineers looking at Dynamics CRM sitting on premise felt that it was useful and helpful to meet the demands of certain users to build customizations that may, let's say, read directly from the database or interact in ways that just are no longer supported in the API levels. And so those types of integrations that are being done to present users with integrated data, both going into CRM but also coming out, like for things like data warehousing and business intelligence engines. So a lot of their integrations had to do not with just putting data in, but also pulling it out for reporting. And so there's certain disciplines around business intelligence where you would replicate the data and do your kind of BI data cubes against a copy of the database. And so that methodology, which is awesome, and SQL has fantastic world-class tools for that, and there's a whole ecosystem around business intelligence professionals that will go in and help you slice and dice your database. Once you put that that CRM data up in the cloud, you no longer have access to the SQL tables. So, for example, Scribe is used to replicate the SQL or the CRM data, like the transactional data of who called who and the funnel velocity and all of those kind of details are all replicated into a local SQL database that they can run their BI tools against. So it's those kind of things that looked really great as a one-off project back in 2007, but today those are really not considered supportable applications because Microsoft CRM has changed its methodology around how custom code is managed. It has to be inside of a sandbox. It has to, so to speak, is actually the technical term that they use for that. So all that code has to be in the special container so it doesn't interfere with other, violate security and do other things. And you don't get to talk to the database directly. And so that's how Scribe is being used to support those requirements still in the business, but doing it in a more supportable way. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem. So I'm going to show you in a second, the interface for Scribe Online, but I just wanted to give you an architectural view of what that looks like, where Scribe Online, we can look at a Dynamics CRM application that is sitting on premise, and we connect to that data through what's referred to as an agent. You'll see in the web browser when I bring it up in Scribe Online, I'm using a web browser and I have maps. We call them maps. But when I save those maps, it actually saves them down to the agent. So the agent actually does all of the work. All that gets sent and is transferred back and forth between the Scribe, our company's infrastructure, and the agent is really just command information. All of the transactional data and the customer data and even the event logging all stays local to that agent. So it's highly secure. It's built for organizations that need to maintain a secure piece. So Scribe is never in receipt of your customer information. That system will then talk to the local SQL database that's on-premise and the local installation of Dynamic CRM that's running locally. And through that agent, it will connect directly to the CRM in the cloud. So I know many of your customers have a VPN kind of connection to CRM or to the Azure Service Bus or to the cloud, and Scribe will ride across that connection because we're connected on-premise, so to the CRM application. So it doesn't have to go, that data doesn't go through the Scribe cloud mostly. Because there's another method you can use, which is a Scribe cloud agent. We can talk to other applications and data can move into CRM for that. So if you had other, maybe I'm migrating from other applications, certain organizations, maybe let's say Salesforce migration, that cloud agent can just connect into Salesforce and read directly and send directly into CRM online. So in those cases, we don't need an on-premise agent to do that. The cloud agent is spun up in its own virtual machine and runs just in your own space. So it's also very secure. So our migration system has we call a starter pack, which includes over 50 maps that are pre-done, and when we get to the end, I'll show you what those maps look like. But these are the different entities that we have out of the box. You can obviously add additional entities, and it's a starter kit to kind of get the majority of the challenges done, which are things like notes. Notes are a special entity that are parented in the system by a lot of different other entities. Like I can have a note that is on a sales order or on an opportunity or on a lead or on the account. So the hierarchy and what goes in first is really important. So Scribe, as part of our mapping process, has figured all of that out, and that part is free for any of our customers, these maps. They become just starting points and a very specific process for how you do that. And organizations like InfoStrat can really help. That's a starter part for most of the projects, and it saves a great deal of time in terms of getting something deployed, of having all of these maps run and getting them all in a very particular order is really important. And so we have support for a lot of the current versions of CRM and inside of the environment. So I want to talk about some of these. I'm sorry, I need to skip over a couple of these here. Of using a couple different practices, the best practices, that we have, and I wanted to share some of these with you, is that whenever you're doing a migration for data, you want to design it for performance, and depending on how much data you're moving, but you might have to do multiple passes with this. And the more complicated things become, obviously that's going to impact the speed. So depending on the record count that you have, whether that's thousands or millions or billions of records, Scribe can handle that level of complexity, but you have to consider how that's going to be in this. So there's testing that has to happen, and again, the experience of the partner really comes into play here in terms of what speed to expect, and a good consultant should be able to look at that system and go, okay, this is running fine, or this is really slow. There's kind of certain benchmarks we have at an entity by entity basis, and not all of the APIs in this environment are built for speed, and so you have to, like Scribe is built to be very performant, but not all the CRM APIs are built for speed. They're just built to move data. And there's been some improvements in the last year, and they're adding some new improvements into the CRM landscape. like foreign key assignments and bulk data handling that can work to improve the performance of integrations and migrations. But often when we're working in this space with these kind of types of customers that you guys are, we're handling a large bulks of data, large amounts of data is being moved. And so especially if it's an ongoing process for a period of time, we have to keep this into consideration of making sure that we can meet all those windows of time with the integration. So integration tools all have different methodologies for how to handle that. So a couple enhancements we have found is replicating that CRM data locally. So it might seem like totally crazy to think, hey, I'm going to move CRM online. It's going to be awesome. Why would I ever want to copy data locally? But again, if I'm integrating or migrating data that also has to be augmented with local data, I can save some time in the integration when copies of that are sitting locally in SQL. So that agent doesn't have to call across the internet to make a lookup. It can do that locally in SQL, and it's much faster, like 1,000 times faster when it's going through SQL than when it's going over the internet to CRM online. So there's a big performance if we're replicating the data. There's also a tremendous amount of effort that can happen around enhancing the database performance. Dynamics CRM is in the cloud, and Salesforce is in the cloud. These apps are cloud-based, but they're not magic. They actually run off databases. And so you can work with the support folks, and they can enhance the performance, and there's tricks and tools that you can do to even improve the performance in the database when it relates to a cloud-based application like CRM. Now, Dynamics CRM and Scribe, we work in the Microsoft space and keep our connector. We have this connector that keeps up to speed with what's happening with Dynamics CRM's API, and they make constant changes to that API. And our team is in Manchester, New Hampshire. Our development team is where they're located. And so there's about 20 people in there that just look at that API all the time and are keeping our connectors up to date for all of our customers. And the cool part of that is the connectors, when they get updated, it just gets pushed out to the customers automatically. So you get to take advantage of these new features. It's pretty cool. So when we talk about migration or integration, I love this one where Alice is from Dilbert given measurable outcomes. So she decides what her objectives are. So she's self-managing here and finding measurable outcomes. And so we say the same thing, that integration and especially your migration needs to be focused. It needs to be a focused process that is around very specific ROI and measurable outcomes. So it can't just be the whole, all this data set in one system and we just need to move it all over there and that's going to be what we're going to do. You have to take a thoughtful look at what is going to happen. So I may have a huge goal of moving all of this mainframe data like the Department of Corrections in Illinois did, but I can tell you, without telling any tales, they didn't move all the data over there because there's newer ways to do things. And so because of that, they were able to take a thoughtful approach as to what do we actually need to migrate. So you don't have to migrate everything. You can keep a copy of your old database and put it in SQL so I can just do reports. If I just need to look at historical data, there's not necessarily a need to move it over. And so you can take a thoughtful approach so I can have measured outcomes and have measurable outcomes and things that your internal people are going to show as success. So often what causes these projects to fail is they try to boil the ocean or move everything over and all the processes and just take a really cruddy design that was on an old system and just now have a new UI for this old cruddy business process. And so, that's part of the whole process is it's an opportunity for you to look at a new way of doing things. And often organizations do that. So you kind of have to take this in mind that we're either going to reduce the time it takes to perform a certain action in the organization or how many clicks it takes to do something, Or if you're a commercial organization, sometimes I can measure those in how much time it costs to save in a single transaction. So 5 cents might not be a lot, but if I do 100,000 transactions a day, 5 cents a transaction is a lot. So organizations can look at it this way and look at things like user adoption and productivity and locations of opening up new use cases for my users. So in the old days, I had to do it this way, and I was constrained because I was local. I had to be in the building, or I always had to have a VPN connection. But now, because it's online, I can, my staff or this particular group of users, they can work on their mobile devices, or they can work out in this other part of the country because, even though we don't have a data center out there, we can send them off with a data connection to the internet. They can always now perform their stuff in the field. So this is a big area of improvement that the organizations are looking to have those measurable outcomes. Security is important to this entire process. Obviously, security is paramount for whereas we're sitting there in Washington, D.C. here. So security is really, really important. And so at the migration and integration level, we have to keep track of and make sure that all of our applications work in the proper framework, and that's a huge benefit of working in this. All right, I'm going to shift here. Sorry, I'm going to move through this very quickly. So I showed you the Scribe Online. We have another tool called Insight, which is a server-based application, and it can connect out to cloud-based applications. So if a lot of our organizations are using this tool, the Department of Corrections, this is the tool that they used to push the data up into the cloud. Dynamics, the Microsoft people, this is the same tool that they use. So they did install a premise-based solution to grab all the data locally and then move it up into the cloud. So there's different kind of flavors depending on what you're going to do. Right here, this is the Scribe Online, because we just have a few minutes left here to go, and I wanted to spend a little time, and then we'll come back to a couple of the slides at the end. So this is the interface for Scribe Online. As we were saying, we have, it's just a URL, and so I'm in a web browser, and I logged in to the system. And in this, we make connections into the CRM application that we're working with. So if this is an on-premise CRM system or if it's online, Scribe supports all those different deployment methodologies. Also on internet-facing deployment. So depending on your organization and how exactly you're migrating to and from, Scribe supports all of the different connection types that are available. And we just connect with the username and a password into that system. And the same thing as we really connect into SQL or any of the other types of applications that we would be connecting into. And from there, we have agents, as we were saying. The agents can be cloud-based or they can be running on-premise. So I've got kind of one of each. So I have one sitting in an office that's running, and it shows me here what all the different integrations that are running with that agent. And then from there, we have what we refer to as solutions. And solutions allow us I'm going to pull in the migration solution set here. This is for the account and contact and lead migration process. And so remember, as we were saying, that there's a bunch of maps. So those are the discrete business logic for each one of these, and they have to run in a very particular order. So if we look at, I'll just pull in, we all understand who contacts are, so I'm going to open the contact map here. So in the contact map, I've got my connection into my CRM system here. This is my old CRM 2011 system, and I've got my CRM Online, and I've just called it CRM Online for 2011. That's the name that we're using to migrate this to. And so the way that Scribe is built up, you build up this map using these control blocks in here. The control blocks allow a business analyst to kind of drop and drag onto the, we actually call this the canvas. This is called the palette. The canvas, the integration that I'm going to do. So you build out the very particular steps that the integration needs. And so here the integration of moving context. I'm first querying for context in the system. I'm pulling back all of the active contacts and the addresses that are part of a contact inside of the system. You can apply things like filtering. So here, as you can see, it's defaulting to active. And this is where we're saying, you don't necessarily maybe need to bring everything over if you don't want to. You can filter that out or look at very particular subsets of businesses or business units or owners, so you can build criteria just to grab a subset of the data that you want to bring over. And then there's logic in here, so if the contact doesn't have an account, if that's null, we're going to use a null value, or we're going to perform a lookup to go try to find the customer that the contact is associated with. There's all these other pieces that go along with that entity, whether that's the business unit that it belongs to. And so if the customer doesn't exist yet in CRM Online, it's going to create the customer and create and update addresses. So there's blocks in here for each one of those entities and each one of those. So if we create the contact, for example, if it doesn't exist, so it's first going to create the contact, then it's going to go and update the addresses. It's got to do an update on the contact to bring in external IDs, and like I mentioned, this can get, I don't want to get too complicated in here for our discussion today, but that's what these different steps do. They do the actual field level mapping for each of these different entities. And this, again, becomes a starting point to handle the level of complexity that's required to do this kind of field level integration. So this stack, if you will, of controls all compile into one piece of code when we're done, and it gets pushed down to the agent. So the agent manages this entire, let's go down here, I'm just going to shrink this down so you can see this whole stack. It's a pretty complicated set of mappings that are here. So there's a lot of steps, as you can see in here, that this thing can go through, and this is just to do the contacts inside of the system. So you can see the huge benefit of having a template that kind of starts right for you, that has a starting point, and as you get additional fields or need to do other things, you can certainly go and add those to this particular integration. So. These show as incomplete, so when I save them, I can save them, and it compiles them all and sends them down to the agent. I can schedule these jobs to run at a particular time, so I can say, I want you to run at a time, go run at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or run over the weekend, or run right now. So you can also set this to be reoccurring in the system. So again, these maps don't necessarily do just create only. It does creating and updating. So again, I can get that benefit of having that other system still up and running and migrate the data over and kind of keep it going until we're ready to turn the other system off. And these maps will manage that part of the process, keeping these up to date. So you would have these on for a month or a week or a couple days, depending on how long it takes to move all the data and how long you want to keep your system running. All right. So we wanted to, I wanted to wrap up on these the last couple points in terms of best practices. One of them is setting expectations. So one of the things that ourselves as business professionals interested in migration and integration, a big part of the process that you have to do is help set expectations with your users. To not only does it help with surprises and controlling risks, but it also helps you deal with customers end users that have unrealistic expectations. that don't understand the complexity. The marketing organizations do a great job of making it seem simple, but between you, me, and the fence post, it's kind of complicated at times. And so folks often have this concept that, well, it's Microsoft, you know, how hard could it be? Well, we have that, it's in SQL, and you know, Microsoft is SQL, so that should just migrate, right? People have these very unrealistic expectations. So a big part of the process for us is in these projects to help people understand, you know, what is going to happen, how long it's going to take to get things done, and understand the constraints that you do not have control over. So some of these issues come up during migration that will never be a deal or an issue or a deal breaker, so to speak, when you're in production. So they're just issues during migration, like the speed of migration. That's always a big issue. We have to deal with migrating millions and billions of records into Dynamics CRM. And so for that process, you have to have bandwidth. A lot of times when we get into these million records of loading, Microsoft support gets involved and they open up additional bandwidth for those customers during that time. And it seems like, man, this is really like, I'm not confident that this is going to work. But at the end of the day, of course, everything goes through just fine. And once the project is done, everybody's happy because the data's in there. So part of this is you're dealing with these kind of one-time events inside the system. So you want to have a plan of action that goes in place with your users that says, today we're going to integrate, you know, the contact records. Now, next quarter, we're going to now integrate with our ERP system to get billing information in. The quarter after that, we're going to add some new data into the system, and so forth and so on. So when we think as users and buyers of software, we expect this kind of roadmap from our product. When we roll out a solution to customers, we want to give them the same, your end users, you want to give them the same effect, that today it does X, but tomorrow it's going to do X and a little more, and then we're going to keep adding stuff as we go. And so, because at the end of the day, you know, all of the workings that run in the background and the stuff that we do, our end users rarely see our work, actually. They just see the results of this. And so that's why it's so important to keep our end users and our customers, quote unquote, those end users, busy looking at the results of what we're doing, having acceptance and testing in the systems, in the training systems, and to validate that process. And the more people we actually get involved in that process, typically the better success that we're going to have. So all right. So, and the last one is, because everybody asks, how much does this cost? What's the real budget here for this? So I wanted to just talk about that for a second, talk about the estimating that happens around budgeting. So we have to include things like the learning curve for a project. So it's new things that are coming in and new tools and technologies. And sometimes different integrations also actually have a transactional cost. And so some vendors charge for their transactions that way. And they're based around the APIs. So like, for example, Salesforce, they have a limit on the APIs that the transactions have. And so if you exceed that, you will pay an additional cost for that. So those may be one-time costs that happen because we're moving a lot of data over in a relatively short period of time. So sometimes you have to plan for that depending on the endpoint that you're working with. Also, there's tools like Scribe that might be involved or will be involved in those processes. And then the other part is that ongoing maintenance for that period of time when we're migrating from on-prem to online. There is a little bit of kind of making sure that somebody owns this. So the tools that we use, is there additional training that may be needed for that group? The tool, as you saw, is pretty simple to use in terms of its upfront kind of droppy and drag kind of thing, but there's also training that may be needed in terms of design and how do you do that. And also, you know, if these are one-time expenses, often this is where you're leveraging as a customer professional service organizations like InfoStrat to do that, because experience, as we say, does matter, and it's often a lot more effective and cheaper actually in the long run to use an organization that's done this time and time again, that can get through a project quickly and let you kind of move on with your life to get onto the cooler stuff, which isn't the data, it's all the cool application features that the users get to have now access to. So
Hey, Pierre?
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to jump in and open up the phone lines for questions, if that's okay.
Yep. No, I'm with you. So yeah, let's take some questions if there's any questions.
Hey, I did unmute everyone. You should be able to shout out your questions. Okay. Sometimes it does sound like a press room, like it used to be when you watched the news and you heard the typewriters in the background from Walter Cronkite. But let me just see if anybody does have a question, or if you want to put it in the chat window, or let me know and I can unmute you. I know we just gave a very short demo of how the user interface looks, but as Pierre pointed out, there's a great deal of work that is involved in the analysis and the planning to really understand how the integration should work. And Scribe does a lot to make the integration process itself very simple once you've decided what you need to do. Okay, it looks like we are questionless for now.
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say, Jim, was, that to reinforce your point was we, the old adage of, measure twice, cut once, that certainly applies to integrations, that we want to make sure that, that the tool is quick to use, and a lot of that quickness comes from a thorough analysis. And designing this on paper and in spreadsheets and on whiteboards and doing that design process up front, and make sure we are asking all those types of questions about what's the impact of the next version of the upgrade and all of these kind of things, to have a good thorough planning, so that the business analysts, when they get down to using the tool, really literally have a map in place of what the field should be, and that it just shortens the whole deployment of the tool and lets those folks get through that part of the project very quickly, because there's not a lot of discovery along the way then. So,
well, the other thing we've found is that integration reveals data problems, and it provides an opportunity to do data cleanup when you're doing migration. So it may turn out that you have to do some data transformations, you have to do some data cleansing, and those issues don't become as obvious until you try to integrate with another system. I'm not saying just in your CRM, but also in the other systems that you're integrating with, ERP or some other line of business solution.
Yeah, very true, very, very true. Yeah, our best practice that we found is organizations, a lot of times the question is, should I migrate the data and then clean it up in CRM? Because CRM has some great tools to help you, dedupe and stuff like that, and we really recommend typically against that strategy. We found that cleaning the data up before you go in is usually the best way, or transforming it as it goes in, so the users inside of the system aren't seeing duplicates, they're not dealing with that issue. And tools like ours and working with staging tool, the experts in integration, we have a lot of tricks up our sleeve, both as software vendors, but also as the partners and consultants that you have. There's a lot of tricks that we know about how to dedupe data before it goes in, or look to do updates instead of inserts if we already find it, or clean it up in SQL tables before we migrate it over. So,
hey, let me ask, what do you recommend to a customer that's evaluating Scribe? What should they do?
So We do have evaluation processes that that organizations do, so they can actually get the tool and the different tools. But so it's typically a little bit of it's a little mini project. So what we'll do is we assign a sales engineer. So myself or Scott. Typically, we have other folks in our organization that will work with the customer and the partner to help set up the technical aspects of the tool, so we're not focused and kind of distracted on how to get things working. So a lot of times we'll get that thing installed and set up. If there's complicated installation issues, we'll solve all of those kind of issues and help with the security questions and all of that. But a lot of it comes down to testing a few things very clearly, things like what's our speed issue going to be? So how quickly can we move, and scoping this kind of sense of, how big is this project in terms of data? So do I have 1 million records? Do I have 500 million records? Do I have 5,000 records? That is important because that's going to deal with how long it's going to take to move the data through the system. And so there's usually testing that we want to do around that, and that will address, as you said, many of the kind of infrastructure issues or access issues that people are going to have to deal with as parts of the project. And then the other part is just how quickly can we handle a complicated entity. So instead of doing all of our things, let's say we are doing grant management and we're also doing invoicing out of the grant management. Instead of doing one of each, just pick one or two things that will be a good use case to say, if we can do invoices, I'm not worried about the grants, right? Or if we can do account records, I'm not too worried about the contacts. It's that kind of thing that, you're really, when you're evaluating it, you're really trying to see if it's the right fit, so to speak, in that sense of speed and performance, and then can it handle our complicated stuff, kind of thing. So if I kind of mind the pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves, kind of a thing. So usually in evaluation, you're being very selective in the entities instead of, again, trying to do every entity in the environment and handle the most complicated issues. And making that a project, actually. Now, some of our customers, and I will say this, depending on the complexity, Jim, and you guys are certainly involved in many different organizations and projects that are at scale. So I don't want to underestimate either. For some of those customers, some of the very largest CRM deployments on the planet, where you have thousands and thousands of users, the evaluation process is very formal. And it actually is an engagement all by itself. And it does require doing every entity. And certainly organizations will go through that process to actually scope out and build a little proof of concept for a division and do that part of the project and then use that as a template moving forward for other departments. So in that case, those kind of departments and governmental agencies that are doing this at scale with many users and different deployments around the world, those types of customers, it is a project all by itself, and it may last months, actually, and it is like a little mini deployment. But instead of it being for 10,000 people, it's for 50. But we're replicating all the data. We're looking at a large data sets to handle the most complicated, kind of design issues. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you leading this discussion.
Yeah, and I also wanted to mention to the attendees the topic that Pierre discussed about migrating on-premise to online and some of the considerations. Scribe has a white paper, and I'll make that available through Jim Townsend at InfoStrat. He also mentioned the case study where Microsoft moved their massive amount of data and users from on-prem to online. Microsoft actually produced a technical document on that as well, and I'll make that available to Jim. So if you'd like those two white papers, just send Jim an email, and we're happy to send those out. And appreciate your time today. Thanks so much. And that's it from our side.
Well, thank you. I am going to just unmute everybody in case there is a last-minute question that someone would like to pose to any of us.
Okay.
Well, then,
Yeah,
on
okay.
behalf,
I'll just do that.
on behalf of InfoStrat, let me thank everyone for joining. We will post a recording of this session, and feel free to follow up with any of us with questions. Thanks so much.